Have you ever seen a scientific documentary where they told you that you likely could be descended from a koala? Have you ever read a scientific article that said you could likely be related to a koala? But yet, human and koala friction-rich skin is indistinguishable from one another. And yet primate friction-rich skin is distinctly different from humans. And evolutionists do not know what to do with this information. It doesn't make sense, but through the biblical lens, it makes perfect sense to me. A lot of people are familiar with the fact that humans have unique fingerprints. And of course, all 20 of our fingerprints are different from each other and different from any other human God has created. 10 on our fingers and 10 on our toes. But we're not the only creation from day 6 that has friction-rich skin and has unique fingerprint patterns. God also blessed some animals with this unique feature. They also have friction-rich skin and they also have unique fingerprints. And it makes sense why we see this type of skin in the animals where God placed it, because these animals are arboreal, or as we would say, tree-dwelling. So koalas, who are marsupials, is just one example that does have fingerprints and friction-rich skin. And of course, friction-rich skin is exactly as it says, it provides friction. So it actually gives us traction between the surface of our skin and then whatever we're grabbing onto. That uneven surface in friction skin aids us in having a firmer grip. So should we be surprised that koalas who do live in trees and grab branches and grab onto food, that God would give them a non-slip surface on their hands and feet? We shouldn't be. But what I think is so amazing, because our God is so awesome, is that he gave them unique fingerprints as well. Now, here's the big problem for evolutionists, because I think when we look at all the animals that have fingerprints, koalas pose a serious problem for evolutionists. So let's take a look why. So if we compare a koala's friction-rich skin and human friction-rich skin under the microscope, as you see here, what we find is they are indistinguishable. So what that means is you can't tell the difference between a koala and human fingerprint. And there's even been articles. I actually Googled it one time. I said, do they actually have this problem in Australia? And I Googled it, and sure enough, there was a couple news articles that came up that said the crime scene personnel were mystified by whether the fingerprint at the crime scene was a koala or a human, because we know that they're just looking at them, you can't tell the difference. I thought that was pretty funny. But you can even see here in this picture how we have this uneven surface on our friction-rich skin. Our skin rolls up and down like mountains and valleys. And so if we take a look at it here side by side, we can see that there are similarities between human and koala. Humans and koalas both share the 3 types of fingerprints, which are arches, loops, and whorls. And we see this in primates and the other animals that do have fingerprints. We all share these 3 basic types of fingerprints. They do have minutia. This just means little tiny details. So there's little characteristics that God put into our friction-rich skin that makes each one of us unique. And koalas have those as well. So that means that no 2 koalas, since the original created kind, have had the same fingerprint patterns, and that includes all 10 of their digits. Each one has unique identity, unlike any other koala God has created, and unlike any human that God has created. So if you think about the unique fingerprint patterns out there, billions upon billions of unique patterns. And then their density of ridge, meaning the width of their individual ridges, that density is almost identical to humans. In koalas, it's about 12 ridges per centimeter. Humans, it's about 11 ridges per centimeter. So very, very close to the point. Like I said, you cannot tell them apart. And under the microscope, the structure almost looks exactly the same. So this is actually a study that they did where they compared a koala, a chimpanzee, and human, and they were looking at their friction-rich skin. And when we're analyzing what's called the density of ridge analysis, or how many ridges will cross a 1 centimeter line, is basically what they do. We can see here that the koala, once again, is around 12, humans around 11, and the chimpanzee is up near 23. That is one of the distinct differences we can tell between a human and a primate fingerprint, is that primates on average have almost double the number of ridges in the same surface area than do koalas and humans. And that's just because their ridges are less dense or thinner, so they just have more of them in that 1 centimeter line. So you can almost always tell the difference between a primate and human fingerprint, but not the case when we talk about koalas. So, what is the problem for evolutionists? Well, scientists have verified that each koala has different fingerprints, right? So that's pretty much agreed upon at this point. And even though in humans, our friction-rich skin covers the entire surface of our hands and feet, it does not in koalas. So there are a couple differences. The first one is their friction-rich skin is primarily limited to what we call the ends of their digits and certain sections of the palms, not the entire surface. And in humans, the arch pattern is actually the rarest. There's like a 5% frequency in humans that you'll have even one arch versus the koala, that it is the most common pattern that they have. In fact, the koala you see here, this is an arch pattern to where all 10 of their digits will all have this, what would be very rare in humans and in primates, arch pattern. But when we look at this through an evolutionary lens, and this is a very simplistic version of the evolutionary tree of life. I always like to point that out. But imagine that you have this single node down here from that single cell that came to life in evolutionary ideas. Of course, we're back to unobservable science, no explanation for it, but evolutionists say just trust us, it happened, right? The single cell comes to life. And then over millions of years, we have these branches of life dividing from that. Now you can see here we have the marsupial branch, and then we have the koala on that marsupial branch. And then way over here on this other branch, you have primates and humans. And of course, they always like to tell us that we have a primate ancestor in the past for humans and primates. And you can see that note here. Well, here's the issue. Have you ever seen a scientific documentary where they told you, Troy, that you likely could be descended from a koala?
Can't say that I have.
Have you ever read a scientific article that said you could likely be related to a koala?
No, I have not.
But yet, human and koala friction-rich skin is indistinguishable from one another. And yet, primate friction-rich skin is distinctly different from humans. And I just mentioned one of those differences a minute ago. And evolutionists do not know what to do with this information. It doesn't make sense in their evolutionary narrative. They don't know how to explain it. Of course, they'll often say, oh, we hope to gather more information in the future to help bridge this gap on why koalas and humans have almost identical friction-rich skin. They admit that it's a mystery, right? It's a scientific mystery. Apes, it would make more sense, evolutionary speaking, if apes and humans shared characteristics in our fingerprint patterns, but we don't. We're actually closer to koalas. And so we know through a biblical lens, they're never going to be able to explain it. But through a biblical lens, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, they climb trees, like I said, they grab their food. It makes sense why God created them with friction-rich skin, but he loves his creation so much that he gave each one of them unique identity in their fingerprint patterns. And even in primates, if we talk about primates, would primates benefit from having a non-slip surface? Do they climb trees, Troy?
Yes, many of them
Do
do.
they swing from trees?
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, primates, like the spider monkey that has that very long prehensile tail, they have found that on that prehensile tail, God gave that particular monkey friction-rich skin, and they've printed their tail prints and found out, guess what? Their tail prints are unique and their fingerprints are unique. And they use that tail to hold on to branches while they feed and while they swing through the trees. So we shouldn't be surprised that God provided those animals that do have friction-rich skin with that exact feature because they needed a non-slip surface for the environments that they live in. So I always say this homology or similarity in design that we see, it is not evidence of evolution, right? But it's confirmation that we have a common creator God who used a design that worked for a very important purpose. So this is just an example of some of the information, I like to say research, that I've gathered here at our own zoos that we do have here. So this is actually down at the Ararat Ridge Zoo, where they were able to get all the lemurs out of their exhibit while they were on their outside location, and I was allowed to go inside and dust all the windows for fingerprints. And so this is one of the beautiful ones I got right here. That one of our lemurs left on the windows because they're inside the exhibits and they're putting their fingerprints all over it as they look out. And I can say it's a beautiful loop pattern that we do see there. So I'm always trying to gather more information and more research on primate fingerprints. And of course, I keep hoping maybe we'll get a koala here at Answers in Genesis in the future so that I can get those koala fingerprints firsthand. That would be a real treat for me as a dactyloscopist, which is a big word for someone who likes to study fingerprint patterns. So we don't just find that these unique fingerprint patterns are limited to koalas, primates, and humans. And I think this is what is just so cool, is that it's found in things in God's creation throughout the surface of the earth. So we know that no two sand dunes have the same fingerprint identification. No two are identical. And in the features or characteristics that make up a sand dune, are the exact same ones that we find on the surface of our friction-rich skin. In fact, we would identify them as the exact same labels. So it's literally like looking at your friction-rich skin when you look at a sand dune with no two being identical. It's in the surface of the land. It's in the surface of water. It is also in the air and cloud formations. I have fingerprinted what I call fingerprint days in the clouds, no two being identical with those minutia characteristics, because that's what gives us that unique identity. And then it's all throughout living things, where no two cats have the same identification, no two zebras. Each zebra has its own unique fingerprint patterns. The flowers that have these raised friction skin, like you see here, this is actually the Stapelia giganta that actually does have raised ridges on its petals, all 5 petals being different, just like our 5 fingers with unique fingerprint identification. We were actually able to raise a Stapelia giganta here at the Ark Encounter. And our horticulturist, Kim Smith, I will tell you, I don't have a green thumb. So I gave it to her. I said, can you please try to get this plant to get me a flower? And finally it bloomed. We actually recorded it and we were able to fingerprint it as well. I was able to actually roll fingerprint ink on its petals and take a fingerprint of that flower, showing that each petal is uniquely different and each one has unique identity. No two flowers have the same identification in their minutia, and that is in birds and it's in fish. There's thousands upon thousands of examples of different species of fish that God created, each one having its own unique fingerprint pattern. So it's pretty mind-blowing when you start to realize that God's fingerprint design is everywhere. Like I said, into the billions upon billions of unique patterns, to the point our Milky Way actually has a unique fingerprint as well. And I do have a copy of that that I keep on file. So I think it's just pretty amazing how we see it from the microscopic level all the way to, like I said, the level of our galaxy. God has placed unique fingerprint design. And that's why I never get tired looking at them.
I understand you had a quiz for me.
I do, Troy. So now you've learned about koala and human and chimpanzee fingerprints. You've learned a little bit about the differences and the similarities. So now I want you to take a look at this quiz and I want you to tell me which one is the human and which one is the primate and which one is the marsupial. So why don't you take a guess on the first one?
Okay, the first one I am going to say is the koala.
Okay, and how about the second one?
I would say the second one is human, and the third one is primate.
Very good, Troy. You got 100%.
Yay!
That's awesome. That must mean I'm a really good teacher, right? So
That's very true. I was afraid
that
there
is
for a minute, but
well, very good, Troy. You did excellent. So whenever I do come across new information or new research that I want to share, or really cool fingerprints that I come across in the programs I do teach here at Answers in Genesis, I post them on my Facebook page. So I would love for everyone out there to scan this code. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram and stay connected with what's going on here at Answers in Genesis in our Science and Education Department.
Oh, that's great. Thank you again for being with us, Dr. Rivera.